The day I found my son's secret bank statement, I learned that he had been stealing from me for 10 years. And the worst part? I had thanked him for it. I had made him coffee. I had bragged to my neighbors about how lucky I was to have a son who would drop everything to help his widowed mother settle her husband's estate. I trusted him with the safe. With the accounts. With the signature on every document I never read. And one quiet evening, in a drawer that wasn't mine, I found a single folded page with his name on it, and a number large enough that I had to sit down on the floor of my own home. That page was only the beginning. Because once I started pulling the thread, I found a forged signature. A fake doctor's letter. And a plan, written in his own neat handwriting, to make sure I never said a word. This is how I found out. My name is Eleanor, and for most of my 72 years I believed that the worst thing a mother could lose was her husband. I was wrong. There is something worse. It is watching your own child help you, smile at you, hold your hand across a kitchen table, and slowly take everything you have while you thank him for it. It began the spring after Robert died. My son, Daniel, drove up from the city the week of the funeral and never really left. He took a leave from his firm, he said. He wanted to be close. And in those first hollow weeks, I was grateful for it. The house was too quiet. The mail kept arriving in Robert's name. There were forms I didn't understand and accounts I had never touched, because Robert had always handled the money, and I had let him. Daniel sat me down one evening with a legal pad and a calm, patient voice. "Mom, the estate is complicated," he said. "There's probate, there's the trust, there's the property taxes. You shouldn't have to deal with any of this right now. Let me handle it. Let me protect you." I remember the relief I felt. It was like setting down a weight I hadn't known I was carrying. "You do that?" I asked. "You're my mother," he said. Who else would? He had Robert's chin and Robert's way of squaring his shoulders when he made a promise. I looked at him and I saw my husband, and I trusted him completely. That night, as he gathered his folders to leave, he mentioned it almost in passing. "I've already started moving a few of the accounts into the estate structure," he said. "Just to keep things clean. Nothing for you to worry about." I nodded. I didn't ask which accounts. I didn't ask what clean meant. I should have asked. In the weeks that followed, Daniel made himself indispensable, and he did it through kindness. That is the part one keep returning to. He was kind. When a tax notice arrived that frightened me, a letter full of red ink and penalty language, he took it from my hands and made it disappear. 2 days later he told me it was handled, that he had caught an error the accountant had made, that he had saved me $11,000. "You don't even need to look at it," he said, sliding the resolved notice into one of his folders. "I've got it." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? But somewhere in the back of my mind, a small thing snagged. He was so careful with money. Not careless the way young men can be, but the opposite. He watched every figure. He knew, to the dollar, what was in accounts I could barely name. When I mentioned wanting to donate to the church building fund, he asked me 3 questions about it before I had finished my sentence. "I just like to know where everything goes," he said, smiling. Habit. One afternoon he came to me with a different sort of request. "Mom, I need the combination to the safe," he said. "The papers for the lake property are in there. I can't close out the title without them." The safe in Robert's study. Robert had set the combination, and Robert had told only me. I hesitated. I didn't know why. It was such a small thing. "Of course," I said, and I wrote it down for him. But that night I lay awake, and the small snag in the back of my mind had grown into something with weight. The first real crack came over a utility bill. I was paying the small household things myself, the way I always had. The water, the electric, the gas. It made me feel useful. And one month the water bill was higher than it had ever been, by a strange and specific amount. Not double. Not some obvious error. Just wrong. I mentioned it to Daniel, expecting him to wave it away the way he waved away everything. Instead, he went still. "Let me see that," he said, and there was an edge in his voice I hadn't heard before. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he set it down and smiled, and the smile came a half-second too late. "Clerical error," he said. "The water company does this. I'll call them. It's only $40, Daniel. I can just pay it." "No. Too fast. Too firm. Let me handle it." "I told you. I handle the money now." I let it go. But that evening, while he was on the phone in the study, I went to the small desk in the hall where I kept my own papers, and I opened the drawer where the bank statements came, and I found something that did not belong to me. It was a statement, folded once, tucked beneath my own. An account I had never opened, at a bank we had never used. The name on it was Daniel's. And the balance was large enough that I had to sit down. I heard him hang up the phone. I slid the paper back and closed the drawer. I did not sleep that night at all. After that, I stopped being a grieving widow and became something I had not been in a very long time. I became careful. I did not confront Daniel. Something told me, some old animal instinct, that I should not let him know what I had seen. Instead, I waited until he drove into the city for 2 days, and I called the one person I trusted who understood money. His name was Walter, a retired accountant who had done Robert's books for 30 years before he stepped back. We met at a diner 2 towns over, where no one would know us, and I felt foolish for the secrecy even as I chose the booth in the back. I told him everything. The accounts Daniel had moved. The tax notice I never saw resolved. The bill that was wrong by a strange amount. The statement in Daniel's name. Walter listened without interrupting. When I finished, he didn't tell me I was imagining things. He didn't pat my hand. He took out a small notebook and asked me for the names of the accounts, and the dates, and the property. "You did the right thing, calling me," he said. "Most people don't. Most people tell themselves a story that lets them keep sleeping at night. The story that it's a bank error. The story that their boy would never." He looked at me over his coffee. "How long have you been telling yourself that story, Eleanor?" "Since the funeral," I admitted. "Then we've got some catching up to do." He paid for both our coffees, and on the drive home I felt the strangest thing. Not fear, though there was plenty of that. It was the feeling of no longer being the only witness to my own life. A week later he called me. "Eleanor," he said, "I need you to stay calm. But there are assets missing. The lake property has been refinanced. 2 of the investment accounts Robert set up for you have been drained down to almost nothing. And it was all done with paperwork that has your name on it." "I never signed anything," I said. There was a long pause. "Then someone signed it for you," Walter said. Meanwhile, Daniel had begun, gently, to close the doors of my own life around me. He asked me to stop opening the mail. "I'll sort it, Mom, you get overwhelmed." He suggested I let him handle the phone calls. These people prey on widows. When I mentioned, carefully, that I had been talking to an old friend about finances, his face changed. "What friend?" he asked. "Just someone from church," I lied, and watched him decide whether to believe me. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The proof. So when he was out one evening, I went into the study, and I opened the safe with the combination I had given him, and I went through his folders one by one. It was there, near the bottom. A bank statement, his secret account, and beside it a ledger printed in small neat figures. It was not theft in a single act. It was a slow, patient harvest. Money moved out of Robert's trust in careful amounts, none large enough to trigger a question, all of it flowing into the account with his name. And there were notations beside the transfers. Repayment. 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 Tucked into the same folder was a letter from a firm in the city. Not a law firm. A lender. 3 years earlier my son had borrowed against a business that no longer existed, a development deal that had collapsed and taken other men's money with it, and the people he owed were not the kind who sent reminders twice. The number at the bottom of their letter had more zeros than the house was worth. I thought of all the dinners we had shared in the months since the funeral. The way he had refilled my glass and asked about my garden and listened, or seemed to listen, while I talked about Robert. And all the while these figures had been sitting in a folder a few feet away, growing, the truth of him laid out in his own neat handwriting. My son was not stealing for greed. He was stealing to fill a hole that was swallowing him. A debt so large it had a gravity of its own, pulling the whole of my husband's life into it. I was still holding the statement when the study door opened behind me. "What are you doing in here?" Daniel said. I turned around with the paper in my hand, and for a moment neither of us moved. He did not shout. That was the worst of it. He crossed the room slowly and took the statement from my fingers, gently, the way you take something dangerous from a child. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said. "How much do you owe?" I asked. "And to whom?" He didn't answer. Instead he set the paper down and pulled a different folder from the desk, one I had not seen, and he laid its contents in front of me with a terrible calm. They were legal papers. A doctor's letter I had never agreed to. Language about diminished capacity. About a mother who could no longer be trusted to manage her own affairs. "I've been worried about you," he said softly. "Everyone has. The forgetfulness. The accusations. I think it's time someone helped you make decisions." And then he laid down the last page, and at the bottom was a power of attorney, granting him full control over everything I owned. It bore my signature. A signature I had never written. I did not sleep in that house again as the same woman. The next morning I told Daniel I was tired, that I wanted to rest, and the moment his car left the driveway I called Walter and told him I needed to move what little remained before my son finished taking all of it. There was one account he had not yet drained, a small one Robert had opened years ago and forgotten. I wanted it transferred to my sister, Margaret, where Daniel could not reach it. Walter walked me through it on the phone, step by step. I submitted the request myself, with my own hands, from my own computer. That afternoon, Margaret called. "Eleanor, nothing came through," she said. "The bank says the transfer was cancelled and the account credentials were changed this morning." He had intercepted it. He was watching the accounts the way he watched everything, and the moment I moved, he had moved faster. When Daniel came home, I asked him, as evenly as I could, why a transfer I had authorized had been reversed. He looked at me with something that was almost sorrow. "There are people who would take advantage of you," he said. "External threats. I'm protecting the estate. I'm protecting you from yourself." Then he said something that stopped the breath in my chest. "And you can tell Walter," he added, not looking up from his coffee, "that the diner 2 towns over isn't as private as he thinks." I had never told him about Walter. I had never said the name aloud in that house, not once. He had heard it some other way. Through the phone, through the line, through whatever quiet thing he had put between me and the world. I understood then that he had built a wall, and that I was inside it, and that he could hear me breathing against it. So I went outside it. I told him I had a doctor's appointment, and instead I drove 3 hours to the city and sat in the office of a lawyer who did nothing but elder protection and estate fraud. Her name was Ruth, and she had gray hair and tired, kind eyes, and she did not flinch at anything I told her. She spread my documents across her desk and studied them for a long time. "These signatures," she said finally, "are forgeries. Several of them. And not careful ones. This power of attorney would not survive a real examination." She looked up at me. "Eleanor, your son has been sloppy. That's good for us. It means he never expected you to look." I felt, for the first time in months, something like hope. It did not last. 2 days later Ruth called me, and her voice was different. "Your son came to my office," she said. "He spoke to my associate. He mentioned the firm by name, mentioned a complaint to the bar, mentioned things about my associate's family that he had no business knowing." A pause. "I'm not dropping you. But Eleanor, I need you to understand something. He is watching your phone. Your email. Assume he can see everything. From now on, we speak only in person." I hung up and looked at the phone in my hand as if it had become a living thing. How long had he been listening? I began to gather everything I could, quietly, on paper, by hand. And in doing so, in the deep files of Robert's study late at night, I found the ledger that told the whole truth. It was not a year of theft. It was 10. While Robert was still alive, before I was ever a widow, my son had been bleeding the family trusts. Small amounts at first, growing bolder. And the figures showed me something that made my hands go cold. On every account, on every transfer, there was one name listed as both the trustee who authorized the money and the beneficiary who received it. Daniel. On both sides. Always. He found me with the ledger. This time there was no calm. He stood in the doorway and told me, in a low and steady voice, that if I continued, he would produce my medical records. That he would tell the doctors I was a danger to myself. That a woman my age, alone, confused, making wild accusations, was exactly the kind of person who ended her days in a locked ward, medicated and quiet. "No one will believe you," he said. "They'll believe me. They already do." I looked at my son, at the stranger wearing my husband's face, and I did not recognize a single thing in his eyes. I left that night. I did not pack a bag, because a packed bag would have told him. I took my purse, the ledger, and a copy of the forged documents that I had hidden inside the lining of an old coat. I told him I was going to bed. Then I waited until the house was dark, and I walked out the back door, and I drove to a small motel under a name that was not mine. I knew he would look for me. So I left him a trail to follow in the wrong direction. In Robert's old address book I found the names of his mother's friends, women long dead or moved away, and I made calls from the motel phone to disconnected numbers, knowing he was watching the line. Let him chase ghosts in another state. He was not idle. 2 mornings into my hiding, my prescription arrived. I had it filled by mail and sent to my daughter's house, away from him, or so I believed. I shook 2 tablets into my palm at the edge of that narrow motel bed, the way I had every morning for 15 years, and I stopped. The pills were wrong. The shape was wrong. The color was a shade too pale. The small letters pressed into them were not the letters I knew. I sat there for a long time with them in my open hand, my heart going slow and then fast, understanding what I was looking at. He had reached into the one part of my life that was supposed to keep me alive. I did not take them. I sealed them in an envelope instead, with the date written on the front in my own hand, and I put the envelope in my purse beside the ledger. When I called the pharmacy, they had no record of any change to my order. Someone had opened that package and closed it again so carefully that the tape had not even lifted. That envelope, I promised myself, would not be lost. And then a message came to the motel's front desk, left by a man who matched my son's description. She will be instituted permanently if she does not come home. I sat on the edge of that bed and I understood that I could not win this alone. A frightened old woman against a patient, careful man who had spent 10 years learning to make people doubt her. So I stopped being alone. I called my sister, Margaret, from a stranger's phone in the motel parking lot. And Margaret, my quiet older sister whom Daniel had always dismissed as harmless, told me something I had not known. "Eleanor," she said, "I've been watching the accounts for 3 years. Robert asked me to, before he died. He suspected. He never wanted to believe it was Daniel, but he suspected, and he gave me access so that someone outside the house would see." Her voice was iron. "I have every transaction. I have the dates. I have screenshots of the logins. I have been waiting and praying for you to call me." I wept then, in that parking lot, for the first time since the funeral. Not from fear. From the simple relief of not being the only one who could see. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked her. "Because until you saw it yourself, you wouldn't have believed me," Margaret said. "You'd have defended him. You'd have told me I was a bitter old woman who never had children of her own. And he was counting on that, Eleanor. He built his whole house on you not believing anyone but him." She was right. That was the cruelest architecture of it. He had not only stolen the money. He had arranged things so that the only person I trusted was the one robbing me, and everyone else was a threat he had taught me to fear. What followed, we built carefully, the 4 of us, Margaret and me, Ruth the lawyer and Walter the accountant. A quiet machine, assembled in the dark, while Daniel believed I was a confused old woman hiding in a motel waiting to be found. Ruth took the envelope of pills and the ledger and the forged documents, and she did not call any of it a long shot. "This is no longer one woman's word," she told me, in person, in a parked car because we trusted nothing with a wire in it. "This is a paper trail. Paper doesn't get confused on a witness stand." Margaret drove to my house and confronted Daniel to his face, while I stayed away. She told him she knew. And my son, who had a price for everything, offered her one. "Name it," he told her. "Whatever the number is, name it, and this stays in the family." Margaret let him talk. She let him offer, and raise the offer, and raise it again. And while he did, the recorder in her coat pocket took down every word. Then she went home, and she did not negotiate. She uploaded everything, all of it, the ledger and the recordings and the screenshots, to the state attorney general's office. At the very same hour, 3 hours away, Ruth walked into the courthouse and filed the petition, the forged power of attorney and the sealed envelope of pills entered as exhibits with my name and the date in my own handwriting. By the time Daniel understood that the trail he had been chasing was false, the real one had already arrived at the door of every authority that mattered. The end of it came in a courtroom, on an ordinary Tuesday. A judge appointed an independent guardian to review my affairs, and within a week that guardian had seen what Daniel had done and begun to unwind it, account by account, what could still be unwound. The forged power of attorney was voided. The fraudulent doctor's letter was withdrawn, and the doctor who signed it had questions of his own to answer. The tampered medication became its own separate matter, the kind that does not end in a fine. And the things my son had done, the 10 quiet years of them, became a matter of public record, with his name on every line. He faced prosecution. I did not go to watch. What I had to decide, in the months after, was harder than any of it. He called me, once, from a number I didn't recognize. His voice was not calm anymore. He told me he was still my son. He told me a mother forgives. He told me that family is the only thing that lasts. I held the phone for a long time before I answered. "You're right," I said. Family is the only thing that lasts. That's why it hurts so much when you sold it. I did not scream at him. I did not beg him to explain. I simply set the phone down, gently, the way he had once taken that statement from my fingers. I kept what remained, which was less than I'd had and more than I'd feared. A smaller house. Margaret 3 streets away now, having moved to be near me. A garden I tend myself. And on the days when the loss of him sits heaviest in my chest, I remind myself that I did not lose my son in that courtroom. I lost him years before, in a study full of folders, and I simply did not know it until I saw the statement in his hand. People ask me, sometimes, whether I would take the inheritance back if I could, the lake house and the trusts and all of it whole again, in exchange for never having looked in that drawer. I tell them no. The money was only ever a thing. What I have now, I built with my own hands and my own name and my own eyes open. It is smaller. It is mine. And when I walk out my door in the morning, into a life that no one is managing for me, I am, at last, exactly who I appear to be. A woman who knows precisely where she stands.